Hi, my name is Kip Lockhart, and for a while now I've been turning bowls and putting these different patterns in them. And every time I take one of these to my local club meeting or I post a picture online, someone always asks me, how do I keep everything so accurately aligned? I get comments like, your glue-up process must be an absolute nightmare in order to accomplish that. Well, I'm going to do this video and show you the process that I use to create these different designs and how I keep everything so perfectly balanced. And you're going to see that the glue-up process is not a nightmare at all. In fact, it's rather difficult to make a mistake once you've made your sled and you've made your templates, which we'll get into in just a minute. But let me just show you a couple more of these different designs so we have a better idea of what we're looking at. Okay, let's start by taking a look at these three. Now, all three of these bowls were fabricated exactly the same way. They were all made by putting 12 saw cuts on a 45-degree angle and then filling those saw cuts with different species of contrasting woods. So I got the three different patterns simply by turning them at different angles. This one over here, again, fabricated the same way. On this one, you can see I have what I refer to as ribbons that I put in over here. And if you look close, you can see these ribbons have a weave effect to them with one going underneath the one next to it, which gives it a nice appearance. This one here is a little different. This one, the saw cuts are put in on a 90-degree angle, and there's 36 cuts on this one. I put 12 of them in working off of this center line, and then another 24 on this center line, which gives you a nice diamond effect. This one, this is a nice birch bowl. Again, the same process. This is sort of a combination of all three of those. This one has the 12 saw cuts on a 45-degree angle. It has the ribbons and it has the weave effect. And it also has 12 90-degree angle saw cuts filled in with walnut. So there's no end to what you can create. But now let's take a look at this sled and my template, and we'll see how this whole process works. Okay, here's my sled. It's really a two-part process. We have the sled itself, and then we have these templates, which I'll explain in a minute. But first, let's just take a look at the sled. Pretty straightforward. I just have a piece of 1/2-inch plywood on the bottom here. I've got two stiffeners in here. This happens to be 3 inches. I've got these two tracks made up of the same 1/2-inch ply, 1, 2, 3 pieces. I have this top plate made up of the ply again, 2 pieces here. And this slides back and forth, giving me the adjustments that we need. Underneath, you see, I just have these two tracks that fit into these two grooves. You notice I have these two grooves in the bottom. Those are there because we use a thin curved blade for this process. This is a 5/64 thin curved blade. And these blades require these stabilizers. The stabilizers, when they're put on, brings the saw blade up on my arbor. So when I raise this blade all the way up, this nut and even this stabilizer comes above my table. So the only reason for these grooves is to simply allow my sled to pass through without hitting. And you see on the top here, I have 3 holes in this plate that's adjustable. I've got a center line on here, and I have a center line going this way. On this one, I happen to have this at 5 inches between center and center, but you can make it anything you want. And of course, my center hole here is centered on here. And this is the center of the bowl all the time. So I have a couple lines on here that I brought up from the saw blade when it's on a 90-degree angle and when it's on a 45-degree angle. This center line, of course, corresponds with this. So if I want the bottom of my bowl to have this piece over here to be 1 inch, simply a matter of moving my center line 1/2 inch over from the proper line, and that'll give me 1 inch here. But the thing to keep in mind if you ever do one of these is this 1 inch is only at the very bottom of the bowl. Now this bowl is only about 3/16 of an inch, and you can see on the bottom here I'm much larger than on the bottom. So this is 1.5 inches. This is only 1 inch. So that grew 1/2 inch on less than 1/4 inch as you turn into the bowl. So just something to keep in mind. Alright, this is the template that goes along with this sled. And it's this template that keeps everything so accurately aligned. So there's several steps to this. I'm just going to take them one at a time and walk you through it quickly. But when we put it all together, you'll see how it all works. So I had mentioned I have these 3 holes on this top plate. I also have the center hole, which matches this one. And these 2 outside holes match the outside holes that go all the way around the ring. Now you'll also see on the template, I have these other 2 holes, which are not on the sled. They're in the bowl. So let's take a look at a bowl blank. This happens to be a piece of 8-quarter maple. I think it's about 8.5 inches square. You see I have a piece of 1/2 inch plywood glued on. And it's glued on the entire surface, not just 2 dots of glue to hold it in place. The entire surface has to be glued to the entire surface of the bowl blank. And you'll see why it's important in a minute. So then I laid this out, I swung my circle, I got my center. I used this same template, once I had the center hole in here, to make these 2 additional holes. So I have my template with these 3 holes, my bowl with these 3 holes, and then my top plate with those 3 holes. And again, you'll see how this all comes together when we make our first cut. And once I have my bowl center here, I've cut it out on my bandsaw. I take a regular wooden faceplate, my tenon to go onto my lathe. This is a 3/8 brass pin. I would put that into that hole, mount it onto my lathe, bring up my faceplate, and I would chew that up, get it nice and clean and nice and square. So the next step will be to actually make a cut. Okay, this is the bowl that we're going to use to make our cuts. This I already have in process. I've already made 8 cuts on it already. And you can see I have it all prepared the way that we talked about. I have my holes on here, my plywood glued on. I put on my lathe, I cleaned up all the edges. So this is the wooden template that we talked about. And this wooden template, of course, I made by hand by simply using a protractor and triangles. And you can make a very accurate one by hand. This is the one that I actually used on the 4 bowls that I showed you earlier, and on about 10 or 12 other ones that I produced. But I have a brother who came over here one day and tried out the lathe and making a bowl. And he says, I have a friend who's got a machine shop. So now I have these very nice 1/2 inch aluminum templates, matches the one that I made out of wood. And so this is the one that I've been using, and this is the one that I'm going to use today. But you can make an accurate one by hand. So obviously this is made with a CNC, so yes, it is a bit more accurate than the one that I made. So you see I have 2 X's on here and 2 X's on my bowl. I only put those on there because even though this will fit on there either way, I like using the same exact holes every time. So this Goes on there, 2 pins fit in, those are my center holes. Now, I have my bowl, my plywood, my template. This whole unit slides under this plate here, and I'm going to line up this center hole with this one here. Now, of course, from my vantage point, I can see that hole. And just a comment on these pins. These pins are 1/2 inch brass tubings. I've used plywood, I used aluminum, but the 1/2 inch brass tubing seems to work out the very best. Once I get it in there. Okay, so that slides in. Now, when you make your very first cut, I really don't think it makes much difference where you start. So in this one, obviously, I made a cut. And when I made my cut, I lined it up with this center line I have here. Put a block in there, I made my line, and I numbered it number 1. And as I go along and make my cuts, I keep numbering them. So we're on number 8. This is the last one I just did. So now it's just a matter of me looking down in here, moving my template up to the next set of holes, and putting this other pin in here. And one on this side. Now I am locked in there, nice and snug, it's not going anywhere that way. Using my hold downs, I just tighten these down. That squeezes everything down onto the bottom of the sled. So when I make my cut through the table saw there, it's not going to rise it up. So, when we actually make a cut. Now, again, this saw blade and this machine is capable of making this in one cut, raised all the way up. But I don't do it that way. I do it 3 times. So that's raised up about 1/3 of the way right now. And so let me turn on my blower and the saw, make a little noise, and we'll show you how this all works. Okay, that's cut number 1. Now, hopefully I don't have to say this, but you want to make sure your saw is shut off and stop turning before you pull it back through. Back through. I'm going to crank this up another 1/3. That's about 3 turns. And we're going to go again. Make sure it's stopped. Bring it back. And we'll go all the way up. Last cut. I like to go through one more time just to make sure I don't have any chips or anything in there. Okay, now the very first time I used this sled, I used it just like this. Pushed it through, shut it off, stood back, and said, that is a terrible accident just waiting to happen. So I put the pleat on here, made this cover, and I've used that cover for every cut since the very first one. So I feel quite safe, quite confident. I'm not going to make a terrible mistake and drop my hand onto that blade. So with that cover, I think it's safe to use. So now we just pull out our pins, and loosen it, slide our bowl out. There's a saw cut that we just made. Let me take this template off. Saw cut we made. So from here to here, this section right in here, this bowl is still glued onto the plywood. So if there's a secret to this at all, I mean, that's it. The bowl never comes apart. So whether you're putting 12 cuts in, 24 cuts, or 36 cuts, they're all gonna be nicely aligned as long as you use the template, and the bowl never comes apart, so things are gonna line up automatically. So now all we have to do is glue in the fillers, and I'll show you that process in just a minute. Okay, these are the fillers that we're going to be gluing into the bowl. I have a stack here of 4 different projects that I'm working on. Now I use my bandsaw and this drum sander to get these fillers down to the final thickness. But I do not sand all of them down to the final thickness at the same time. I leave these all a little bit heavy. They all have to go through the sander at least once, if not 2 or 3 more times. If I were to sand them all down to the final thickness, we all know that wood moves. If it swells up, that's okay, but if it shrinks, that's a problem. Because when I start all this, from the time I use my first one to the time I use my last one, it could really be months. So I have to wait until I'm ready to use them before I sand them down to the exact finished thickness. So I just have a little sled here, a little piece glued on. I have my pieces still heavy, so let's put them through a sander and I'll just show you one process. So let's turn it on. Put it through once. What I do to make sure they're flat and they're parallel, I flip them around this way, flip them over, and push them through again. Yeah, I know my saw cut is 5/64, so this tells me I'm just 5/64 right now, just a hair heavy. So I'll go over and try it. If it doesn't fit properly, of course, I'll have to bring it back, put it through again. But if I put it through again, I do not adjust the thickness. I leave it just as it is, just keep putting it through again until it fits. Alright, this is my jig for my glue up process. This is simply a piece of melamine. I have it screwed down to a couple of waste blocks under here, so I have some space from the workbench to underneath here. I have this little piece of 1/4 inch masonite, or you can use any scrap that you want. This is the bowl that we put our saw cut in. I take this, the edge of that saw cut here, line it up roughly with the edge of that 1/4 inch piece of masonite, or whatever scrap you want to use. There. something like that. Take a clamp, put it through that hole that I have in there. Clamp this down over here. Just snug that up nice. Other clamp goes over here. Somewhat in the center. And that's bending this out just enough to help me get that filler piece in there. This is our piece that we sanded. I've checked it before. Fits in there very nicely. Once I get it fit, I want to just give it a mark. I want to put it back in exactly the same way it was. Sometimes when you flip these the other way, for whatever reason, sometimes they don't fit as well. So I want to make sure I put it right back in the way that it's fitting. So I'll set that aside. Take my glue bottle. I give it one shot across here. Give it a second or two. I give it another one. Take my trusty piece of pipe cleaner. There. Give it a good back and forth all the way down to the bottom. I take the give it a little twist down there, work it back up. Then I take my piece, follow my pencil line. I want to glue on both pieces. Yeah, that's good. I pass the lines. Excuse me. Glue on the other side. I want a little bit more than that. Be down there in the bottom, of course the glue's all going to come up to the top. Okay, I just sort of work it down in there slowly, rocking it back and forth, moving it around, get right back to where those pencil lines were. Give that glue a chance to ooze out on the bottom over there. Get it down tight, it's good. Using this clamp. This one. Take my paper towels over here to have ready. Get some of that glue off of here. And I take one clamp across here. Now when I first started these, I'd take this over to the bandsaw at this point and I'd just cut these wings off. And I'd use a wire clamp instead. But I find this works just as well, easier, quicker. And I don't get glue all over my bandsaw when I cut these pieces off. So I wait for it to dry to do that. Get some more of this glue off of here. I'll make sure I get it off the bottom here as well. And there we have it. So I'm going to let this glue overnight, or dry overnight. I want to make sure it's dried all the way through. And I'll show you how I clean it up, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, well, it hasn't been overnight, but it has been about 4 hours. So as you can see, I took the clamp off it. I did take it over to the bandsaw and I cut the wings off of here. So now we have to clean up the bottom of this. So again, this is the bottom of the bowl. So I just take a block plane. We'll do this one real quick. Bring this down. cabinet scraper, bring it down nice and flush. If I have to, I'll take my cabinet scraper, bring it down. But you do have to maintain this as a very flat surface. This is the bottom of the bowl again. And every time we make a cut, it lays down that way, of course. So this one, we put 9 fillers in. I've got 3 more to make this one with 12. And when that's all done, if you have 12, it's going to end up looking something like this one. And of course, if you decide to do 24, it will end up looking like this. So now, this one here is all ready to be mounted onto the lathe and start turning. But there's one more step that I have to take before we put it onto the lathe. So we'll go over to the drill press and I'll show you that. Okay, now that we have our bowl completed, we have to put it onto the lathe and we have to make sure it's completely centered. So here's the way that I do it. I take a scrap piece of plywood, I have it clamped down onto my drill press table, and I had put in a 3/8 drill bit, which I drilled down into the plywood. I then took a piece of the 3/8 brass tubing, put that in the hole. I took off the 3/8 drill bit and I put in this 1/4 inch drill bit. Now this is the center hole that we've been using throughout the process to keep everything centered. I take this and drop that over that pin. Now I believe I'm as centered as I can be. Then I take my drill bit and I drill it down into the bowl, only about 1/8 of an inch. Again, this is the bottom. I don't want to drill so deep that I see that when I turn the bowl on the inside of the bowl. So I only go down about 1/8 of an inch. Then I take a standard wooden faceplate, got my tenon on there for the lathe. When this was in the lathe, I drilled my 1/4 inch hole, put in a piece of 1/4 inch dowel, cut off so it just sticks out a little bit. This will now go into that hole, and I will glue that right in place. And I'm quite confident that it's as centered as I can possibly make it. So now we'll go put that onto the lathe.